I mean, personally, I think there's no good outcome of this case. Like, three children's lives have been lost, and somebody who was seeking and asking for help didn't get it. I think the only positive glimmer around this case is that it's ignited a conversation around how we support mothers and families here, which is just not okay. Well, outside of the issue of it not being in the DSM, this illness that is highly treatable and temporary, that then cascades to lack of research, investment, and study in it. Additionally,
the trial in the US of Lindsay Clancy, who is accused of killing her three children in 2023, has gripped America. Her defence says that she was suffering from severe postpartum mental illness, including psychosis. Prosecutors allege that she made a calculated decision to intentionally kill her children, who were aged 5, 3 and 8 months. The issue of postpartum psychosis has gained more attention as Clancy's trial approaches the 1-month mark. It is a rare condition in which patients can experience mania, depression, or a mixture of both, and also psychotic symptoms such as hearing voices that are not there. Now, hundreds of Lindsay Clancy supporters, many wearing pink clothing emblazoned with phrases such as "believe," "she needed help," and "peace for Lindsay," have been gathering outside the courthouse in her trial, which is currently taking place in Plymouth in Massachusetts this week. We're going to speak to Meghan Cliffel, a writer and maternal health advocate. 8 months after the birth of her second daughter, Meghan began hallucinating. Good afternoon to you, Meghan. Thank you very much for joining us.
thank you for having me.
I presume that this is a case you're watching very closely?
It is. I'm not watching every day because it's hard to consume for anyone, but I'm very aware of what's going on, obviously, as a maternal mental health advocate.
Can you, before we get into some of the issues in this particular trial, because not everyone will be completely up to speed with it, can you tell us about your own experience after the birth of your second daughter? What happened to you?
Sure. I felt well until about a month after going back to work. So when my daughter was 4 months old. And at that point, I was kind of able to language to my husband, "I don't feel like myself." And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Oh, I just feel anxious and a bit sad." But to be honest, we were two working parents in New York City. We didn't have a lot of support and help around. So rather than go see somebody, I just kind of kept going. Also, at that point, we hadn't heard of postpartum psychosis, and I didn't match a picture of postpartum depression that I had in my head, which is what I knew about at that point. And it all kind of looked pretty good on paper. I had a big job, a lot of responsibility, 2 kids, until about 4 months later, when one morning on my way to work, I'm noticing, it's a Friday, December 4th, 2015, that my mind is more scattered than usual. I'm having trouble focusing at work, a couple little bouts of giggles, but honestly, no one flagged anything. None of my colleagues flagged anything. But it wasn't until I left that Friday night and stepped onto the subway when sort of my irrational mind was kind of left behind with the shutting of the subway doors. I walk on the subway and I suddenly believe, as everybody turns to look into somebody entering the subway, that people are watching me. And then when they go back to their iPhones and, earbuds in their ears, that it's actually deeper than that I'm being surveilled. And I'm suddenly the center of this complex plot where everyone's out to get me and my children. And then as the evening goes on and into the next day, I believe my husband's part of it. So I'm keeping everything I know in from him, kind of in like an internal battle, and trying to figure out how to escape with my baby girls. And then, about 10 a.m. on Saturday morning, he finally he realizes I'm very, very sick once the battle becomes external and I'm trying to get to the kids and alternately to the roof of our apartment to jump.
Gosh.
And he's artfully keeping me from the kids and the roof, and has now called 911. And then eventually I've get handcuffed by the NYPD and I'm taken to Bellevue Psychiatric Hospital.
My goodness. It's incredibly distressing to go through, distressing to witness, and distressing to listen to. What happened after that? What help did you get?
When I was at Bellevue, I thought people were coming to get me and my children, and people did come to get me and my children. I didn't believe it was the NYPD at that time. I sort of thought I'd been captured. In some ways, my deluded reality that my brain had cooked up was corroborated. And so when I woke up in Bellevue after being sedated, I thought I was captured, but I wasn't sure whether my children were alive. So I spent the first few days trying to escape, and sending my husband away when he came to visit me because I thought he had a hand in keeping me there and wasn't kind of coming uptown to visit me. He was actually just watching from behind a one-way mirror. And it's a few days of trying to escape and being met with shots in the arm later that I'm then kind of feeling like I'm trapped in this place where I keep on, things keep turning from foggy to black. And somebody who said she was a psychiatrist, I'm totally deluded. I do not believe she's a psychiatrist, says, hey, if you behave and stop trying to escape, you can see your kids again. I tell her I need it written down. She probably wrote it down on a scrap of paper. And that's the beginning of me thinking, okay, maybe I should take this medicine, that, and honestly, the desperation behind my husband's eyes, who was like, trust Meg. So once I started taking the lithium and risperidol willingly, I, kind of reattached to reality. But that begins like another long, painful journey of realizing it was all in my head, dealing with the resulting PTSD. And honestly, it took 2 months for somebody to label it as postpartum psychosis. As you're probably aware, it's not a diagnosis in our main handbook of mental health conditions, the DSM. And so, it wasn't until 2 months later when I advocated to be seen by a mother who was a psychiatrist that I happened into the chair of somebody who was a fellow in reproductive psychiatry who could correctly label what I had. And for me, that was a real beginning of a turning point in my own healing and not thinking I was just kind of, honestly, the narrative in my head was like a shameful mess who was unfit to mother, but somebody naming it was the beginning of being like, oh, I was sick. I was really sick. And now I need to get better.
Going back to this particular case, Lindsay Clancy, so again, for people who don't know, she doesn't dispute carrying out the killings, but she's pleaded not guilty to murder charges, saying she was experiencing postpartum psychosis at the time. And the prosecutors are alleging that she did make a calculated decision to intentionally kill her children. Obviously, we're kind of in the midst of this trial right now. There's a lot of stuff still to come, lots of testimony. But what have you made of the discussion around this so far? Because to me, and again, I'm sure the algorithm is targeting me because it's identified me as someone who is a mother. This is all over my social media feeds, and some people are very angry.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think there's no good outcome of this case. Like 3 children's lives have been lost, and somebody who was seeking and asking for help didn't get it. I think the only positive glimmer around this case is that it's ignited a conversation around how we support mothers and families here, which is just not okay. Outside of the issue of it not being in the DSM, this illness that is highly treatable and temporary, that then cascades to lack of research, investment, and study in it. Additionally, our medical system is not equipped to treat the range of maternal mental health conditions, which, by the way, are the most common complication of childbirth. Maternal mental health conditions are 1 in 5 women will experience. Postpartum psychosis is 1 to 2 in 1,000. But psychiatrists aren't required to learn about reproductive psychiatry. There's no board exams in it, despite it affecting half the population, i.e. women. And additionally, we don't have things like paid leave or, we have very, very few mother-baby units. So our system is deeply, deeply broken. And, what I've come to learn as a maternal mental health advocate is there's no other period in a person's life when we can predict you're going to struggle potentially with a mental health condition as after having a baby. Yeah. It's almost like we have this crystal ball, and instead of use that information to support families as they have children, we actually sort of hear like, okay, have the baby and see in 6 weeks. Instead of, in the lead up to having the baby, we're checking on the baby all the time. But once you give birth, there's this big gap in care. And as you prepare for birth, there's not enough knowledge around the range of things that can happen or social supports.
What I don't understand is obviously, you talk about the kind of medical what people are supposed to know and don't know about. So that's obviously kind of unacceptable, but it's a fact. But what I don't quite understand, I suppose, is that, there were many warning signs that something was not right. That this is, I think, the mother-in-law giving a testimony saying that she told us she had thoughts of harming the children. Now, when a mother says that to someone, I don't understand why is there still a gap there? Why would the system not kind of come into full effect at that point and someone do something rather than these warning signs just being, just melting away, basically?
I think it's just honestly a product of how defunct our system is and people not understanding postpartum psychosis and just not having enough support around this or knowledge. And it's heartbreaking. I volunteer for Postpartum Support International, and I facilitate support groups of women who've been through postpartum psychosis. And it's just not okay time and time again how I hear if they've gotten the wrong medication or lack of support. It's really devastating, the current standard of care in our country. And devastating that we know better. We know what keeps women well. I mean, I went on to have a third baby healthfully, despite my risk of recurrence being 1 in 3, because I created a plan for myself centered around my own well-being that uses the research. But the fact is that what we know from the research is not actually what plays out in our clinical system right now, because there's a gigantic gap due to things I mentioned, like the lack of classification in our DSM, and in turn lack of knowledge and of providers.
Meghan, thank you very much for talking to us. It's fascinating, it's harrowing, it's incredibly worrying. But as you said, we are at least talking about this now. And it's astonishing, actually, the gaps that still exist when it comes to maternal health. That's Meghan Cliffel. She's a writer and maternal health advocate.